Welcome, everyone. It is an extraordinary honor for me to be here to help celebrate one of my true heroes and my best friend, Judy Woodruff. And just to share the entire Woodruff Hunt clan, especially the great Jeffrey Woodruff Hunt. When I first came to NBC News 40 years ago as a child reporter, sort of like Ellie, who did such a great job, and I'm going to try to do as well as she did, there was one woman in the corresponding corps who there was one woman in the corresponding corps. And not surprisingly, Judy Woodruff just wrapped her arms around me, helped me at critical moments in my life, stood by me, helped me get past several work crises, and along the way we've celebrated every Christmas with the addition of my future husband starting in 1988, every Christmas with the Woodruff Hunt team, starting with Jeffrey, then of course Ben and Lauren or Hemi, who's of course my goddaughter, of whom I am enormously proud. So I don't have children myself, but I have borrowed at times and shared in the joys and the sorrows and all of the challenges and the heroics of this incredible family. So it is wonderful to be with my friend Judy. I'm going to embarrass you here to tell you that she is of our generation, of my generation, since we are 2 weeks apart. I am the elder. Let's just say that I have a insignificant birthday this month, and Judy will follow 2 weeks later. So my kid sister, Judy Woodruff, she is, I think, male or female, the superb, singular journalist of my generation. But tonight we are here because in addition to everything else she does, anchoring the NewsHour every night and doing extraordinary work, traveling, her public service at Duke and other organizations, what she has done with her devotion to Kennedy Krieger and to this institution and other related spina bifida and other organizations is just unique and unheralded. So we're here to support the extraordinary work of Kennedy Krieger and all of the people, the Sloans and all of you who are so amazing in what you do every day. And 20 years ago, if we can think back, your friends and your family remember so well what precipitated this, but when you finally found Kennedy Krieger, and how did it feel to have the embrace of this community after we had been without hope for a number of weeks?
It made all the difference in the world, and I can't go any further, though, without saying about Andrea Mitchell that she is the preeminent journalist of our generation, and every generation, because she sets the pace. She sets the pace, and we all struggle to keep up with her. So I have to say that, and I could say a whole lot more, and I will in the coming minutes.
But for your friends and all of us who love Jeffrey and you and Al and Ben and Lauren, I can't imagine being Jeffrey's mom or dad or sibling and the challenge of figuring out what to do.
It was a very tough time for our family. It was the summer of 1998. Jeffrey was 16 years old. He just finished 10th grade, and he had experienced a significant brain injury, a life-changing brain injury. And the doctors told us, you need to go to the best pediatric neurological place in the world. And they presented us with a list of places. And guess what? The #1 place on that list was just not even an hour away from Washington, D.C., in Baltimore, the Kennedy Krieger Institute. And we had heard of it a little bit, but we're not familiar with it. Of course, we had heard of Johns Hopkins. But Andrea, you're right. Our family was knocked flat on our backs. And you're right to say the family, because the whole family is affected when one member of the family is hurt. But what we found at Kennedy Krieger is, I'll never forget the first day I rode with Jeffrey in an ambulance from Washington to Kennedy Krieger, and we went straight to a room, and we had already been introduced to some of the doctors, like Dr. Gary Goldstein, whom you've met, who's here tonight, who was, of course, the longtime boss, leader, inspiration at Kennedy Krieger. And we had met the amazing Guy McCahon, who I mentioned earlier in my interview with Ellie. Both of them had gone out of their way to make us realize that we were not in a dark place, that we were in a place that was going to give Jeffrey every possible opportunity he could have. But in addition to that, in walk nurses, therapists, young people with big smiles on their faces who looked at Jeffrey and looked at Al and looked at me and said, you know what our job is? And one of the young women who said this to us, Angela Carbonell, is back there in the back of the room. She looked at us and she said, you know, Jeffrey, my job is to get you out of here as fast as possible. And so Jeffrey was still in a coma. He couldn't communicate, he couldn't talk, he couldn't eat, he was on a feeding tube. We were still very much in a state of shock. So when Angela said this, in fact, I just said this to her, when you said this to me, I said it was like somebody splashed cold water in my face. And I realized that there was a light somewhere out there. And that was just the beginning, Andrea, of our Kennedy Krieger journey. We did meet physical therapists, occupational therapists, recreational therapy, speech therapists, who became part of Jeffrey's daily routine. And they made it possible for us to get through that time. Jeffrey doesn't remember a lot of this because he wasn't officially technically out of the coma until he was there from August till the end of November. But by the time he left, he was awake and alert and on his way to a new phase of his life. And but Andrea, it took every one of those people every day greeting us with a smile and saying, as you heard me say earlier, Jeffrey, you're going to smile even before you start talking again. And he did. He was laughing. I'll never forget the day I was at work. I took some time off and went back to work, and Al was with Jeffrey the first day he spoke. He put Jeffrey on the phone, and of course I burst into tears back at my office in Washington. But it was a journey, and it was the Kennedy Krieger family that got us through it. And it was their amazing physicians, it was their expertise, it was their science, it was their research. They brought it all together.
And you've spoken about Dr. McCahon and what he's meant to you, and I know him, I feel, because I've seen him at significant moments in Jeffrey's life, college graduation and other moments when he and his wonderful wife come and are part of the extended Jeffrey family. But let's talk about Dr. Ben Carson, because he played such an important role in accepting the challenge, really, of taking care of Jeffrey.
He did, Andrea. And we're so pleased to have Dr. Carson here tonight. One of the first things we were told after we arrived at Kennedy Krieger was that Jeffrey was going to need another surgery. It was the last thing we wanted to hear. And we were told that by a group of people we were talking with, that they would go and come back to us with the names of potential physicians. Dr. McCahon walked in and said, I've already spoken to Ben Carson, he's going to do this. Well, at that point in our lives, we knew who Ben Carson was. We knew what an extraordinary reputation he has as one of the, if not the preeminent pediatric neurosurgeon in the world. And so the fact that he the fact that he was able to make time in what was already a very busy schedule for Jeffrey. Jeffrey had that procedure, came through it, was better at the other end of it for something that absolutely had to be done. But every step along the way, Andrea, there were people who made a difference. There were doctors, as I said, there were nurses. And I can't go any further, though, without saying what a difference our friends made. The first week we were with Jeffrey in Baltimore, and Al and I were taking turns living in Baltimore. Andrea and Alan came over, and they said, we're going to take you out to dinner. So we had asked the staff, all right, where should we go? And they named some wonderful, Baltimore, as you all probably know, is a city of neighborhoods, and they named some wonderful neighborhood Italian restaurant. And so we said goodnight to Jeffrey, and we piled in our car and drove and got to the restaurant. It was filled with people, crowded. People were already well into the evening celebrating, and Andrea walked first. They were taking us to the table. I was next, and then Al, and then Alan. And Al is kind of listening, just making sure everything, we're moving along to the right place. And he hears a man say out loud as Alan walks by, honey, I think that's Alan Greenspan. And his wife said, you've had too much to drink, you're cut off. So which broke some much needed ice for us that night. We spent half the night laughing and smiling about that. But it was, to make a serious point, you and Alan, you who were there for me during that time, from the moment we knew something had happened to Jeffrey, all the way through to the end, what you've meant to our family. Our families happen to live far away, mine in Georgia and Oklahoma, Al's family in Pennsylvania. So our friends in this city have made all the difference to us. And I have to say, those of you at the front tables who are our beloved friends, Jeffrey's godparents, Mark Shields and Ann Shields, we love you so much. You have meant everything to us, going back to the beginning of our lives, practically. And so many of you, I'm not going to be able to name everybody, but our friends have made a world of difference.
Now, you've stayed involved with Kennedy Krieger, and Jeff is still an outpatient there. How has that made a difference in your lives, and why your commitment to this place?
It has given us incredible sense of security. And Andrea, what you say is absolutely right. Jeffrey today is now in his 9th year living in a wonderful, supportive community in Westminster, Maryland, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from Washington. It's about 45 minutes from Baltimore. That program, where Jeffrey, I should have mentioned, Jeffrey, after his experience at Kennedy Krieger, he attended the Kennedy Krieger outpatient school. He graduated from that. He went on back to high school, was able to graduate from high school, spent 8.5 years, was able to graduate from college. Yay, Jeffrey. And when he graduated from college, his younger brother, Ben, who's 5.5 years younger, was about to go away to college, and Jeffrey said, all right, he's going to be living away. I don't want to live at home anymore. And so 8, 9 years ago, Jeffrey said, you've got to find a place for me because I'm not living with you and Dad. Understandable. So we scoured the landscape, hoping to find a place on the East Coast rather than the West, and we were incredibly blessed to find a place in Westminster. It's known as Target Community and Educational Services Incorporated. I want to ask Dr. Tom Zerpoli, who's the president of Target, to please stand up. Wherever you are, Tom, you're amazing. Thank you. He told me not to recognize him, I'm sorry. But Jeffrey receives extraordinary care there. The young people who oversee the care of people who live in the residential program are all earning their master's degrees in human services at McDaniel College. And long story short, it is a phenomenal place providing residential, vocational, and educational services to so hundreds of people who are like Jeffrey, who need that kind of support. So we're blessed, and we are incredibly blessed that for his medical care, Jeffrey is just a hop and a skip down the road from Baltimore and able to continue to go to Kennedy Krieger. And I also want to just say a quick shout out, Andrea, to Dr. Frank Pidcock. I think you're here, Dr. Pidcock, who was here. Dr. Pidcock was one of the doctors who took care of Jeffrey. He was that team who took essential care of Jeffrey 20 years ago. He's still at Kennedy Krieger doing amazing work day in and day out. I could go on and on with thank yous.
Well, some people might well wonder how you and Al, with such busy careers in journalism, which is hard to schedule or anticipate, how did you manage to commute to Baltimore, take care of Jeffrey, be with your other two kids?
Well, I tell you, I'm the luckiest person in the world to be married to the one and only Al Hunt, who's sitting right there. Al. I think, Andrea, we decided early on that if this thing that happened to Jeffrey wasn't going to defeat us, which we weren't going to let it do, that we were going to become stronger because of it. And I have to pay tribute right now to Jeffrey's brother Benjamin and his sister Hemi, who are here, because they have been rocks. Lauren was 9 and Benjamin was 11 when Jeffrey experienced his injury. So their lives have been defined in many ways by this. And I think, as everybody knows, when you have something like this in your family, it affects the entire family. It's not just the one person. So we have been beyond blessed to be supportive of each other, to be supported by our friends. I love you so much, Al, Jeffrey, Ben, and Lauren. You've held me up when I've needed you, and I hope I've been there for you. And Andrea, I have to say, you mentioned work, which does take up some of my time. I have to say how incredibly lucky I am to work with the one and only Sharon Rockefeller, who's sitting right there, who you only got to hear a quick slice of it tonight, but Sharon has truly devoted decades to public media in this country, not just to WETA, which she leads, but to public broadcasting across the board. And she's left her mark on it, and public media, we are all better as a people because of what public media does, I believe, and Sharon has played an enormous role in that. So thank you, Sharon. And I also want to thank my executive producer, Sarah Just, who's sitting right over there, and a number of my NewsHour colleagues. I can't name all of you, but you're all amazing. I am so lucky to work with this incredible team. They put up with my crazy schedule. Andrea and I talk about this a lot, about how we couldn't do what we do. Yes, we're the faces on the air. We couldn't do what we do without the incredible people, young people, who just work day in and day out, and especially during the last year or two. It's been a busy It's been a busy time.
It's kind of been busy. When you think back to when Judy and I started at NBC, Judy was the White House correspondent covering Jimmy Carter. I was the new general assignment reporter out of local news, and ended up covering the energy issues during the energy crisis in the 70s in 3 Mile Island, and then joined Judy and our great friend John Palmer, whom we lost way too young, at the White House. So if I can just interpolate this, just to know the character of Judy and her colleague John. I've recently celebrated 40 years at NBC, but in 1981, I just froze on the air on the Today Show, as a matter of fact. It was right after the assassination attempt, and I was supposedly covering the movement of John Hinckley by helicopter from where he'd been held to the courthouse downtown. And some anchor asked me, what did I see? And I was at least a mile and a half away from the event, and I absolutely froze. And they basically, the then president of NBC banned me from television and basically said, we're going to get rid of her as soon as we can, you know, let's never see her again. This is 1981, March of 81. And Judy piped up with, we'll take her at the White House. And I became the sort of extra hand doing radio, any pickup jobs that there was. In those days, we had 2 big deal correspondents, and then I did radio or anything that was left over. And now we have 5 or 6 people covering the same thing because it's so intense. The workload, social media, all of the platforms. But I never would have had this career if Judy had not rescued me from oblivion. Back
Slight exaggeration.
then.
Slight
True story.
exaggeration.
Totally true story.
Andrea,
But anyway,
we wanted Andrea at the
digress.
White House because she was, if you're covering a story, who do you want to be at your side digging up the facts?
well, I
and
always
finding out
suspected it was because Judy was dating Al and wanted weekends off, but
That was part of it.
we'll never know the real story. But finally, I guess just you've spoken of so many of the professionals, but what have you learned from them at Kennedy Krieger and about yourself going through this experience and coming through it at the other side?
Oh, I think, for one thing, I learned that people have the capability to do things that they don't think they can. Number one, I watched Jeffrey come back from an incredibly devastating injury, and I've watched him come back so far. I just, you can't be around Jeffrey and not celebrate what he's done. But I But I've also seen the importance, we've spent this evening talking about supporting each other. I've seen people bring out the best in other people. People who are medical professionals, people who are therapeutic professionals, who are education professionals, people who work with Jeffrey in his education. I've seen the best in people, and I don't want to think it came from the worst kind of situation. I hate to think that we all have to be in some kind of crucible to recognize this, but I think there is something to that saying, that you're stronger in the broken places. And I think for sure that we have been beyond blessed to be surrounded with all the professionals I've mentioned, the friends, the family, the professional colleagues I work with. I could spend the rest of this night naming people who've made a difference in our lives. And my thank you is endless. And I'm here tonight, Andrea, really to just pay back in some small way how much we've received from Kennedy Krieger and everyone we've gotten to know as a result of Kennedy Krieger.
Well, we live in a very tough environment, in a very tough town, in a tough business. And this is a rare night for Washington, which speaks to the fact that, in a way, we still are family. That this is a city of neighborhoods, as is Baltimore, and that we come together when we need each other, and in joy and in sorrow at times. And I just want to thank Judy for being so personal and so caring and so revealing in this way tonight for something she cares about deeply, which is the Kennedy Krieger community. We've talked a lot about 20 years ago what it was like when Jeffrey showed us his incredible courage. We want to share a video about the Kennedy Krieger of today and the science and the care and the future for our community and everyone who comes to this extraordinary institution. Thank you all for your support.
Thank you, Andrea.